Welcome to DLA Dialogues, From Factory to Foxhole, the podcast where we dive into the heart of DLA's mission and mindset. I'm your host, Jake Boyer. Today we're exploring a crucial component of DLA's strategic framework, the Warstopper program. Joining us is Sharon Croll, an expert on the program and its impact on our logistics capabilities. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
To kick things off, Sharon, can you give our listeners a once-over-the-world on the Warstopper program and its history?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm going to take you back to about 30 years plus in history. Post-Cold War, we're not really focused on fighting the next fight, as a nation, and we kind of, get into this congratulatory, things are going to get better sort of time. Mm-hmm. And so back in the day, DLA managed, and still does today, the nerve agent antidotes that are needed for chemical warfare. And at the time, back in the 80s, that particular vendor indicated to DLA that there wasn't any kind of demand signals at this point because we weren't, stocking our arsenal for this. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have enough demand to keep the line running and open. So the 9th director of DLA, Lieutenant General Russo, knew that this could be a problem because we probably need that if we're going to go to war in the future, right? Mm-hmm. And so he reached out to the Army and convinced them to generate almost this demand signal that wouldn't have otherwise existed. Now, the forethought behind that was perfect because 2 years later, once this came into play, there was Desert Shield that kicked off in those military operations. So, Jake, could you imagine sending your loved ones to go fight a chemical warfare without any nerve agent antidote with them? Right?
No.
So what happened was they did an after-action review on those operations, and they determined that because of the actions that DLA took, that it prevented the line from going cold. So it saved 2 years, which it would have taken to reconstitute that line to make nerve agent antidotes to then take. And then it would have cost over $40 million back in the 80s. So you can imagine kind of what that would be like in today's dollars. And so that really was the genesis of the Warstopper program, and it became one of those things where Congress even put it in the National Appropriations Acts back in 92 and 93. DOD, you have to make sure that you have items at all times for the military services for things that could stop a warfighting capability. So that's how the Warstopper program was actually named.
And clearly it paid off in 2003, and hopefully if we ever have to find ourselves doing that again, it'll pay off in the future. When you're in the Warstopper program, what exactly are you doing to mitigate risk?
So I think the best way to relate it to just folks that aren't familiar with the program is to kind of compare it to maybe running. Do you run, Jake?
I'm just now getting back to running, yes.
Fantastic. So let's pretend that you've never run a single half mile ever, but you're going to train, and I tell you, Jake, get off the couch today and go run a 10K. Can you do that for me in 10 minutes?
I could not do that now, and I could not do that in 10 minutes.
But what if we took time together to say, let's start off and do, just 5K, just a basic minimum 5K, to just stay healthy. And then I said, tomorrow you're going to run 7, 8K. Do you think that that's a stretch? Could you do it reasonably?
Once I was up, yeah, that's doable.
So you're you've got your endurance and you've got your strength warm. That's one way that Warstopper gets after risk mitigations in the supply chains to make sure that the military has what they need. We try to sustain those capabilities. Mm-hmm. The other way we get after it is, what if I said, Jake, you've been training so hard you can do 10K, but I need you to run it in 3 minutes. Is that possible?
Without a DeLorean, that's impossible.
What if I could get you a DeLorean?
Well, we can talk about that if you can find one.
I feel like we could probably piece part it together. But all joking aside, that's the other aspect that Warstopper does, is really looking at what can we do to gain that momentum and to help industry meet those fast, unexpected surges that you have during military mobilization operations. So we both sustain, but we also both enable a very fast, quick turnaround.
So now that we've talked through what you're doing, how does this fit into our attempts to be prepared for contested logistics environment?
So our program, think of us as an enabler. You need us for a certain phase of time in your readiness strategy. Our entire program's purpose is contingency support so that the soldiers can fight, win, and come home. That's our goal. And we focus on a very key point in time to facilitate and buy enough time for industry to be able to ramp up to wartime op tempos.
Okay. Can you share some just high-level examples of how the program has been leveraged in recent years?
Sure. So I'm going to use, for the sake of just common items that most of your listeners will probably recognize. But I think if you go back to 2020, the pandemic time frame, I think everyone can relate to you couldn't find toilet paper on shelves, you couldn't find masks, you couldn't find a lot of the medical equipment, and we were postponing, elective surgeries and things like that, right? Because the supply chains were really strained and constrained, both from, having the resources needed, but also logistically too, as we're in more of a global kind of economy and environment in that realm. And so Warstopper had the forethought years and years ago, back when H1N1 was a thing, to investigate N95 products and respirators. And so part of what we do is really partner with industry, and we analyze risks, and we look for bottlenecks and choke points and vulnerabilities that would prevent us from being able to have a very sudden increased demand in an item that DLA manages. And so we had put in place years prior to the pandemic contingency contracts that allowed us to have access to materials, not end items, because we don't want to buy and put a bunch of stock on a shelf where you might never use it, or maybe in the case of N95 respirators, they're going to go bad and there's a shelf life. And so you can't really stock your way out of, the apocalypse or something, right? And so what we try to do is come up with creative solutions to allow us to have access to this. And so when the pandemic hit, in the initial days when you couldn't even buy a box of N95 masks if you wanted to, or at least reasonably, is probably $20, $40 a box, commercially. So we had things ready for the military so that when they deployed the USS Comfort and the Mercy, for those kind of things, we had masks available in those initial days. Now, not probably as much as we would have liked to have had, for a worldwide pandemic, but it was something, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're always with risk kind of evaluating and redefining how your strategy is as both your global economy or your manufacturing or your threats change. We're always looking. So in learning and lessons. I think the other one that's most recent that maybe folks might relate to are the Hurricane Helene in 2024 with the flooding of North Carolina, your first responders. A lot of times you need to take meals ready to eat, in that kind of emergency kind of preparedness sort of response. Well, there's a long lead time subcomponent that goes in there, which are the flameless ration heaters. And so Warstopper has an investment there where we have a buffer, if you will. So once emergencies happen and you need to quickly respond, they're able to just ship them out within 24 hours, make sure it goes into the MREs, and out the door they go. And so that's part of the readiness strategy that we have to give time for industry to make more of those as we need them and as those kind of emergencies sustained. And then with the flooding this year that you saw all throughout the Midwest, again, our resources in that particular investment were used to help first responders there as well and our nation's citizens.
So you talked a little bit about learning when you were talking about COVID-19. And we all know the stresses that were put on supply chains worldwide and are still stressed at some points. What did you all learn from the response to COVID-19 that can apply to being prepared for tomorrow's crisis?
So I think the biggest lessons for us that we learned in the program that we really strive to address is time is a pacing threat. I think it's so common for people to think we have to buy a bunch of things to blow things up and we need these wonderful, amazing, weapon systems, which we do, and it's so important. But I think that folks tend to forget time. Because if you look back into history, even with World War II to ramp up, at the beginning of it, we were probably as a nation spending $1.5 billion, and it still took 5 years for us to get up into the billions to get to the manufacturing and kind of that wartime op tempo. And time is the consistent thing. It takes time to spend money. It takes time to make things. It takes time to get things to and from transportation locations. So in order to really be effective in our program and to support contested logistics and to make sure the military has what they need, we have to manage time as a commodity, and each of us serves our purpose in that. And so Warstopper, we have a specific window of time that we operate in so that we can facilitate that success.
Looking ahead, how do you see the program evolving to meet future challenges?
So it's funny you should ask that. We're doing that right now, Jake, day to day. We're partnering all throughout DLA, outside of DLA at other agencies and the services to come up with complementary strategies so that when we're looking to target and address risk and time, we're able to layer where we're placing our efforts and the solutions that we're coming up with so that we get the biggest bang for the buck. And we don't have, being stuck into very specific prescriptive, this is how much access I want to something to do X, Y, and Z mission. We're essentially making our investments and our strategies more flexible so that as warfare strategies change, which you probably saw during the Ukraine fight, right, where they made all of these, unmanned, remote vehicles and aircraft and things like that, it's always evolving and you have to be agile. And so in the past, we've done a very good job at, being prescriptive. And now we're spreading it out to allow us to have a faster acquisition strategy with our teams so that we can adjust each year as the threats change and evolve. I can change the makeup of what we have in our readiness contracts so that it's constantly able to evolve and change. And we're going further back into the supply chains and really looking for those purple colored, things where you can really invest and have the most change throughout touching a myriad of different weapon systems and platforms and applications, and really coming up with unique strategies with industry so that we're not going to get a specific amount of material. We're looking at long lead time subcomponents, and we're looking at raw materials, and we're looking at a phased approach to the strategies that gives us the most movement, and doing that in concert with all of the other program offices collectively throughout DoD.
Well, Sharon, thank you for sharing all this great insight into the Warstopper program. It's clear it's a cornerstone of our strategy to ensure military readiness. But now it's time to finish up with a little bit about you. This is the lightning round. So, first off, what's your superpower? What are you really good at?
So, catastrophic thinking, Jake, which probably makes me uniquely qualified for the Warstopper program to think about all things that could possibly go wrong, and do it very quick. So,
I mean, that's one of the better answers I think we're going to get in this podcast. Conversely, if we're going to learn, we have to know where our weaknesses are. What's your kryptonite?
Oh, boy. Well, I'll tell you, it's probably three things, Jake, which has nothing to do with work. But my love for travel. I also have an affinity for antiquing and dogs, actually. Oh. Specifically Boston Terriers. They're fabulous.
Boston Terriers. Finally, it can be a book. It can be a movie. It can be a podcast. What's something good you've listened to, read lately that people can take something else away from?
So I have to think back to the days growing up, and my dad would bore me to death and make me watch How It's Made. I don't know if you remember that show.
Vaguely.
But you would go into the manufacturing plants and they would demonstrate. I mean, this is a day where, as kids, we didn't have TVs in our bedroom, so you had to watch what your parents were watching. And so I used to hate it. But, it's actually fantastic when you're thinking about what DLA does and what the suppliers are doing for the warfighter and how things come off and how quickly can they change. And just being able to visually see these things really helps you to be able to identify what could we change here to make this go faster? Could you get a different output? Could we automate this piece and get 20 times, more of a production? And it's just a great way to think about logistics and kind of what DLA does and how we get parts into the hands of soldiers and on weapon systems and platforms. So I thank my dad for boring me to death as a kid.
That's fantastic. Sharon, thank you so much for your time today. I've learned a lot. Hopefully the audience is going to learn a lot, both inside DLA and outside.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, Jake.
It was a lot of fun on this end, too. For DLA Dialogues, I'm Jake Boyer. Until next time, remember that learning is a superpower. Use it wisely.